So just to say thank you again to everyone for joining. My name is Finn Tobin. I'm the Communications Manager here at ARB, and I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar. So in today's session, my colleagues here on the call with me are going to give a brief presentation, and that's going to cover who we are and our statutory functions, the principles behind the new scheme, and what you actually need to do to make sure you're meeting requirements. My colleagues Simon and Rosie are then going to get on with answering your questions. We've got quite a lot of those already. So we're going to endeavour to get to as many as possible. If you haven't submitted a question already, and if anything comes to you during the course of the presentation, do feel free to use the Q&A function on your screens. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague James, and he's going to give an introduction to ARB and our statutory functions.
Thank you. Yeah, so we know that for a lot of you, this might actually be the first time that you've heard from us directly. And for some of you, that might be because you're new to the profession. And for some of you, it might be because you've yet to join it and you're going through those stages of your education. And so we thought it would be helpful to just start out by setting actually out who we are and some of the reasons why we exist. So one overall thing to start off with is that we're an independent regulator, and we've been established by Parliament as a statutory body. And so what that means in practice is that Parliament and elected MPs and others have passed legislation that actually defines our role and sets out everything that we do is ultimately based on those powers given to us in the laws. And so the main law there is something called the Architects Act 1997. So if you go on our website or in different talks like this, you'll see that mentioned quite a lot. And it's that law that gives us a number of core functions that are on that slide there. So we ensure that only those who are suitably competent are allowed to practice as architects. And the main way that we do that is by approving the qualifications that are required to join the register. So if you're already registered, you'll have already gone through those and done those qualifications. And for some of you, you might be doing them at the moment. We then also maintain that register, and it's really important to us that that register is publicly available. And that means that anybody who wants to use the services of an architect can therefore be confident that anyone on it is suitably qualified and fit to practice. We also set the standards of conduct and practice that the profession must meet, and sometimes we take action if an architect might have fallen below those standards of conduct or competence. And then finally, the other big area that we do is we protect the legally restricted title of architect. And there's two things to really highlight in that. So you'll see that a common theme through these is public protection and the public register. And that's a really fundamental part of what we do, and will be a really common theme about some of the areas that we'll talk about today. And the second that I haven't covered on the slide there is around our independence. So we're independent from the government, and we're also independent from the profession. And this slide goes into that in a little bit more detail too. So we're not a membership body, and that means that we are independent from the profession. And we're also independent from the government in terms of our day-to-day work. I mentioned in the previous slide that a lot of what we do is based on legislation, and that means that ultimately our statutory responsibilities come from that legislation. Whereas if you think about us compared to a membership body, for example, their services might be geared a bit more towards their members and what their members might like them to do. Registration is also a legal requirement to use the title of architect in your work, whereas for a membership body, membership might be optional, and there might be various benefits to that, but ultimately it's optional. And so what all this means in practice is that sometimes what we do doesn't necessarily align with what the profession might want us to do, but we'll always try and get views when we make big decisions, including from the profession. And in fact, sometimes a lot of the time, the law requires us to. And the reason for that, again, is because our focus is on public protection and doing what's better for the public. And so the next slide gives us a bit of insight into what the public think. And this chart is from a piece of recent research that we've conducted with an external research agency. And it was looking at how the public perceives the concept of professionalism amongst architects. And we'll publish this research in full next month, but we thought it was helpful here because it gives a bit of context into what they value, particularly when we think about public protection and what they're looking for. And so members of the public were asked to choose the most important thing from that list when thinking about the fact that architects were a registered profession. And the highest on there was around being appropriately and highly qualified and having specialist knowledge. And we also noticed that actually a lot of people picked up on the significance of CPD as well. And so when you combine those two things, we think it's really interesting that actually a lot of the public do see that combination of things as important in not only having the skills, but actually being able to maintain them as well throughout your career. And so on that note, I'm going to hand over to Simon, who's going to talk a little bit about the new scheme and that's set up to help you to do just that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Simon Howard. I'm the Director of Standards here at ARB. Firstly, thank you for joining us. I'm sure that you've given up your lunch hour to do that. So I'll crack on with talking a bit about the actual scheme itself and what you're going to need to do to comply with it. So I guess the genesis of this CPD scheme is a new power that was given to to amend the Architects Act that was contained in something called the Building Safety Act. And that power that was contained within the Act requires all architects to carry out CPD as part of their continued registration. And that legislation arose from, well, first of all, the Grenfell Tower disaster, as we all remember, and then Dame Judith Hackett's subsequent report indicating that competence across the built environment really needed to be improved. So with that power, we developed a set of competencies, a set of principles in which we consulted on, and you can see those in the slide. I think first of all, it's important to say that we were really keen to avoid a tick box scheme where hours or points are seen as more important than genuinely useful outcomes. And we also proposed that rather than being a pure compliance model aimed at catching architects out and catching you out and taking you off the register, our CPD scheme should be a genuine attempt to improve the competence across the profession by encouraging you all to do good quality CPD that's relevant to your practice in a way that suits your life and your learning styles. And then finally, you'll see the bottom two principles as well, in the sense of we recognise from your feedback that while you're interested in doing CPD, in fact, probably more of you do more CPD than you probably realise, you're very much less keen on the administration that surrounds recording it, and particularly if you use other CPD schemes such as the RIBAs. Amanda, could you have the next slide, please? So the scheme we've developed is based on the CPD activities you do rather than on the CPD points. Or the amount of hours that you commit to doing CPD. And we want it to be focused on the outcomes of those activities and how you'll apply it to your future practice. So ultimately, it's your choice what CPD you do and what form you do it in. So to be clear, CPD can take a wide range of forms. And while formal training and training sessions can be part of it, equally valuable is the informal CPD that you carry out throughout your working lives on a day-to-day basis. So more information on what constitutes CPD is available on our website or on the MyARB portal, but it can range, for example, from self-directed learning to an insightful conversation that you have with a colleague. All of that counts as CPD. There is an exception that you'll see on the slide as to what CPD you must do. And that is because we've identified two areas of architectural practice that are such fundamental importance that we decided everybody must carry out some CPD in relation to them. And they are, well, unsurprisingly, building safety and environmental sustainability. Again, though, I must stress, this can be in relevance to your own practice. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. So, for example, there's no point us saying that you must go on a principal designer course if your architectural practice doesn't touch on compliance with building regulations, but there must be a way that you can apply safety and sustainability development to your own professional lives. So even though we're mandating you do CPD in relation to these crucial areas, you still retain the discretion to be able to do it in a way that's meaningful for you. So once the CPD has been carried out, finally, following year, a selection of records will be selected for audit by some specifically appointed audit architect reviewers. And the purpose of that audit is twofold. While this isn't a compliance model, we do need to ensure, we're a regulator, we do need to ensure that people who say they've logged their CPD have in fact logged it. But also, we want to be able to provide feedback to those selected for their future development and how they might improve their learning. So it's a twofold process in doing that. So stress again, this is not a compliance scheme that's aimed about removing you from the register. At the extreme example of this, you could make up CPD. You could just say, I've done X, Y, and Z and log it. That's not the, and you'd be able to do that. But that's not the purpose of this at all. This is a genuine attempt to design, we designed this to help you become better architects. Amalia, could I have the next slide, please? So what do you record? It's really simple, recording your CPD. You simply record what you've done and when you did it. But then, and this is the important bit, we want you to reflect on what you've learned and how you'll apply this to your professional work in whatever formal practice that comes. That's the kind of the key intellectual exercise that we think will benefit you, and will prevent this from being a waste of everyone's time. Next slide again, please, Maria. So just following the diagram here that you can see, complying with the CPD scheme, relatively straightforward. At the start of the year, you can set your own development goals, and we've included a personal development, that's easy for you to say, a personal development plan, a PDP, within the MyARB portal, a template for those of you who want to use it. It's voluntary, but it may help. And then throughout the year, you log your CPD in a way that I've described. You either log it on the MyARB portal or on the RIBA portal if you're a member of the RIBA and you need to comply with their scheme. And I'll touch on that again just in a moment. Then at the point of re-registration, alongside paying your fee, you confirm that you've carried out your CPD. You tick your box and say you've done it, and then you will renew your registration for the following year. In the meantime, you will carry on CPD for the subsequent year, and we will select a number of records who will be selected for review and feedback. I said that I would touch on those of you who are RIBA members, because the feedback we've had is that's a really important thing, that nobody wants to be recording it twice. So we've worked with our colleagues at the RIBA to say two things. First of all, if you comply with the RIBA scheme, then you will have automatically complied with ours. They're compatible. It doesn't work the other way, but that's fine. So if you want to record your CPD on the RIBA portal, you need not record it on the ARB portal. The only thing we would ask you to do is, if you're one of those architects that's selected for audit, then you will need to download your records from the RIBA that you've done and send them to us. But again, we've worked with our colleagues over at the RIBA, and that should be a straightforward administrative thing that you can do. I'm going to stop talking now because I know there's lots of questions that people have sent in already, and I'm sure there'll be some more questions live. So in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rosie, who's going to come off mute, like I almost forgot to do, and she'll walk you through the MyARB CPD portal. Rosie.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, as Simon says, I'm going to show you, we've got screenshots of the MyARB portal to show you what to do. So if you are logging in your CPD on our portal, we'll show you that section, and then we'll show you what to do if you're a Reba member. I would just like to remind everyone that we actually have a phased rolled out with the CPD section for the online portal. So we opened it online for Windows users in January, and we're aiming to open the CPD section for mobile access and Mac users by the end of February. So what you can see on your screen right now is the home page for the portal. So when you log in, you would be directed straight to this page, and to the left, you can see the navigational menu. So you've got home, my profile, which is where you update your details, my active documents, my safekeeping documents, my transactions, and then, most important section, I think, my CPD. So all you need to do is log in and then click on my CPD, and you'll be taken to the CPD pages section. The section is 2 pages. You've got the personal development plan page and the CPD page. The CPD page you will automatically be directed to when you click on my CPD. So when you go there, you'll have some guidance, as you can see at the top, and then you'll have the list of mandatory topics. So every time that we have a mandatory topic, if it's new, it will go there and you can see what is the mandatory topic for the year. And then you'll see that your name is there. If we go on to the next section, slide, please. Yes, so the CPD page has 3 sections. The first section is the one most people will be using. It's called CPD activities, and this is where you will log in your activity. So what you can see there is what it looks like once you've inputted an activity. You've got your date, your activity type, the topic, and then you've got a column to say whether it is the mandatory topic or not, and then the learning reflection. And to the right of that, you can see the create button. The create button is how you input your activity log. So you would just click on that and then work through those different fields, the date, topic, activity type, mandatory, sorry, the mandatory, whether it's mandatory or not, is automatic, so you don't need to worry about that. And then you put in your learning reflection. On the create pop-out box, you will have 4 prompt questions to remind you what to think about for your learning fraction. What's important is that you record what you have learned from the activity and how it's been applied to the to your practice. If you can, identify, also add how it's improved your competence, and if you want to do any further learning within that area. Okay, thank you. And so the next 2 sections on the CPD page are CPD documents. Now this section is only for Reba, currently only for Reba members, and we'll come on to that in a later slide. But the 3rd section is the CPD history. So this is where you'll be able to look back on your previous year's records. So if you click under the name, you will be able to see the record on my ARB. And if you go to the right, you can see a little arrow, and that's where you could email a copy of your previous history record to yourself. So obviously this is the first year, so you've only got 2024, but from next year, you'll be able to see your previous year's history and be able to see it on the portal or email it to yourself to get a copy. Okay. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about how it works for Reba members. So please remember, if you're a Reba member, it's your choice if you want to use the ARB portal or not. You absolutely will meet the scheme requirements if you just stick to recording it on the Reba system. So the CPD document section, as I said previously, is for Reba members only. You would click the upload button, and this pop-up box will pop up basically. Document type, as it says, it's only for CPD records here. So it's not about your certificate. So if you attend a CPD activity, you often get a certificate of attendance, a certificate of completion. This is not for, we don't need those certificates for the scheme. This section is only for a copy of the Reba record. So you would click on the search button to say, yep, it's my Reba record. Then you go click on choose files and upload a copy of your Reba record. You will need to have downloaded a copy of your Reba record from the Reba system to be able to upload it to the ARB system. Now, the Reba record documents, there's 3 records. I think you get an Excel spreadsheet and then 2 PDFs. What we're looking for is the Excel spreadsheet because that has your activity log and your learning reflection. The other documents are just a summary and don't have enough detail to meet our requirements. So it is the Excel spreadsheet that you can download from Reba that we would like uploaded there, uploaded to my ARB. Now, you only need to upload to my ARB if you have been selected for the annual review. It's not something that you have to do every year. You can if you want to. Again, it is your choice, but it is only a requirement if you have been selected for the annual review. So you do not need to record both in Reba and ARB. You can just record in Reba and upload if asked to upload. Okay, thank you. Right, the PDP section. So this is your personal development plan. If we go to the next slide. This is a useful tool which we would encourage you all to think about using. And it's basically just a way to organize what you want to do for the year, to have a think about what you need, what your development needs are, what your needs are for the practice, and then to identify how you're going to meet those needs. Now, it is optional. You do not have to do this. You have some prompt questions on the portal just to help you. Again, it's your choice if you follow them. You don't need to answer those questions to create your PDP. What you write is individual to yourself. So some people will want to write lots and lots of details. Some people might just want 2 or 3 prompts. It is your choice and it is not part of the review. You will not be assessed on your PDP. We would suggest that you treat it as a working document. So that means that you can go in and update it and amend it throughout the year. so that it adjusts to how your work commitments change throughout the year. Okay, thank you. Right, so you've had a very brief overview there of what it looks like on the portal, but and we have a couple of points that we'd like to go through just to bear in mind. So for the scheme, while there is no minimum requirement of number of hours and there is no minimum requirement for number of CPD points to collect, we do recommend that you aim to complete a minimum of 8 activities. Please remember, it doesn't matter what the length of the activity is. What matters is whether you've learned from it and can apply that learning to your practice. If you haven't learned from it, you shouldn't consider it a CPD activity. It should be something you gain professional development from and can apply it to your practice. CPD activities can be both formal and informal. So formal could be a paid course, it could be an in-house training session, could be a conference session, or informal CPD could be on-the-job experience, discussion with a peer, or even learning from a mistake. As we've said, what identifies it as being a CPD activity is whether you've learned from it and can apply to apply it to your work. So we are happy to accept both formal and informal activities. As I said, please don't upload any kind of CPD certificates or attendance reports. We don't need them for our scheme. If you want to upload them to MyARB, you can put it in the safeguarding documents, but please do not put it in the CPD document section of the CB section. That is for the Reba members only to put a copy of their Reba record up. Our scheme applies to all architects on the register, no matter what field you are or where you're located. The whole purpose of the scheme is to help people to develop professionally. So it doesn't matter what your work is, your CPD should be relevant to the job you're doing and it should be relevant to the location you're in. So if you're working as a town planner, then you need to do CPD that's relevant as a town planner. If you're working in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, then you need to make sure the CPD is relevant to the Canadian or Australian or New Zealand regulations. Don't do UK unless they apply to your work. And finally, just to help you, give you a starting point of where to look for potential CPD activities, we do publish links to CPD resources on our website. But please bear in mind, it's not a requirement to undertake those CPD providers. We do not endorse or promote any of their course materials. It is just simply a signpost to help you, give you a starting point, and it is your choice whether you actually do go with those providers or not. All right, thank you very much. I'll hand over back to Finn.
Took myself off on mute as well. Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you, Simon. I'm hoping everyone found that useful. So we're going to move on to the Q&A portion of this webinar now. We've had a lot of questions, as I'm sure you can all imagine, with the amount of people that we have on the call. We actually had over 100 submit in advance, and there's plenty of them coming in live as well. So we're going to try and get to as many as possible. So I'm going to kick off with one of the ones that we've had submitted in advance, and it's from Adrian. So Adrian's practicing in Wales, where the Building Safety Act has not yet fully come into effect. And he's asked if he needs to comply with the scheme. Simon, can I ask you to take this question, please?
Short answer is yes. So the Building Safety Act amended the Architects Act, so it's that you need to comply with. So this scheme applies to everyone on the register, regardless of location, regardless of what kind of practice you're in. Everybody must do CPD as a requirement of registration. I hope that's what he was asking, rather than whether the Building Safety Act applies to him, which is a bit of a nuanced point.
Yeah, I think our point is if you're on the register, you need to do CPD. It doesn't matter where you're located. So we have another question here from Louise. So Louise has asked a question about how quality versus number of hours can be recorded. Rosie, can you say anything more about this? Specifically, she's asked if architects can follow Reba guidance. And she's also asked a question about what would constitute insufficiency. So yeah, if you could speak on that, please.
Sure, no problem. So the purpose of the scheme is that it's outcomes focused. It's not about how many hours you've collected or number of points you've collected. It's what you've got from the CPD activities. So that's where quality comes over quantity. It doesn't matter if you do 50 activities but don't learn anything. There's no value to that. So, but if you do 4 activities and you've gained significant learning from it, that has not only enabled you to do your job competently, it has developed your competency, then that's what we're looking for. The whole purpose of the scheme is to help you to develop professionally. Reba's scheme asks for more of their members than our scheme does. So yes, absolutely. If you follow the Reba scheme in full, which includes identifying the lessons learned from the each activity and how it's applied to your practice, then you should meet the ARB scheme requirements. Insufficiency would be that you're not meeting your development needs. So for example, if someone has only done 2 CPD activities and they fail to identify what they learned from it or how they've applied it to their practice, we would say that was insufficient and ask them to reflect more in depth on what they gained from the activities and help identify where else they need to develop. Okay, I hope that answers that question.
If I could just comment on that as well, when I spoke about this as being a non-compliance model, we have to retain the rights to say to somebody, you haven't complied with this, you don't get to continue to be an architect. But that really will be reserved for people who refuse to engage whatsoever with the scheme. That's not the intention of the scheme. If somebody's had a fair go at doing their CPD and they haven't quite met the standard, then we'll work with them to make sure they can meet the standard. It's only going to be reserved for those people who just cannot or will not carry out any CPD.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in, and we seem to be getting a lot of questions from architects who are working in adjacent fields, if I can say that. So things like academia, or people who are working in the public sector, I suppose fields that aren't traditionally considered architecture. So I'm hoping we can kind of answer all of these questions in one go. Rosie, do these types of architects, do they need to do the CPD scheme?
Absolutely. If you're on the register, then it is a requirement to maintain your eligibility to be on the register to complete your CPD. But it needs to be relevant to your role. So if you're not working as an architect, then you need to ensure that the CPD does meet your work requirements. We do set the mandatory topics, so you do need to still do at least 1 CPD activity for each mandatory topic set, but where possible, you need to ensure that the CPD activity where you're going to learn from is relevant to your specific role. Please don't just do architecture work because you think that's going to meet our requirements. It's not. What's going to meet our requirements is you undergoing CPD that's relevant to your work. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in, and we've got one here from Victor. And again, this was asked by a few people when they were registering. Victor has asked, does this webinar count as CPD? Rosie, do you mind if I ask you to take this one again?
Yes. So what counts as CPD is down to the individual architect. If you can learn from it and can apply it to your practice, then yes, you can consider it CPD. So does this webinar count as CPD? You have to do CPD to maintain your eligibility for registration. So yes, you could consider it CPD because you're learning what to do for something that you have to do for your work. So yes, it is your choice, but yes, you could consider this webinar as CPD if you've learned from it and can apply it to your work, which means can you now use the portal to log your CPD.
Thank you. I've had a question here from Stephen. So Stephen has asked about where he can choose subjects for our CPD scheme. Simon, can you explain the approach that we're taking to topics for the CPD scheme?
Yeah, so we've been really clear that we're not a CPD provider. We haven't got those powers, and neither have we got the powers to accredit other people's CPD. But what we can do, and we do on our website, is we signpost architects to good sources of CPD, particularly in relation to those two key topics, environmental sustainability and building safety. So there's some really relatively detailed additional guidance on the areas that people can think about when considering their competence in relation to those two areas. But as I say, we signpost. We will largely, I'll be honest, signpost to the RIBA. We've got an excellent CPD offering, but that's not to say that architects have to use the CPD offerings of the RIBA. They can go where they want.
Thank you. So I have a question here from an anonymous attendee, and again, there's a lot of people asking questions about this, and I hope it should have been clear from the presentation, but one final time, let's just clarify it. So if we have architects who are Reba members and are already participating in the Reba scheme, what do these architects need to do? So Rosie, could you take this one, please?
Yeah. They just need to make sure they're adhering to the Reba scheme in full, which includes when you record your activities, writing up the learning reflections, so what you learned from it and how it's applied to your practice. Now, in relation to our mandatory topics, Reba runs 10 core topics. So the core topic, health, safety and well-being, if you do CPD activities related to that topic, you will meet our mandatory topic of fire and life safety. And if you do CPD activities under the sustainable architecture core topic, you will meet our environmental sustainability mandatory topic. So long as you do those topics, you are meeting our scheme in full. You record on the Reba system and keep your documents all there on the Reba system, except when you've been selected for the annual review. You will be notified by email and asked to upload a copy of your Reba record to the ARB portal by a set date, probably around January, February of each year. And we're asking you to upload a copy of your Excel spreadsheet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nikki has asked a question about a specific CPD course that potentially covers a number of topics. Simon, can architects use the same piece of CPD to cover multiple topics?
Yes. Yes, they can, as long as they can identify different learning needs in relation to what they do. Learning development. As long as they can identify different developments, then that can be a different CPD activity. Yeah. So yes, it's the short answer.
This is sort of a good follow-on question as well from our one about the RIBA. So what about architects who are members of other professional membership organisations? Kate, for example, is a member of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. She's asked, can she use her CPD records for ARB's scheme too? If she's doing CPD for that organisation, can she use that record for ARB?
Well, she can use the same CPD that she's done in relation to that organisation. What she can't do is in the same way that the RIBA members do, say, well, I've complied with this scheme and therefore I've complied with the ARB scheme in terms of logging. And that may well be an option in the future, but clearly we have to do a certain amount of quality control in relation to the scheme that we're saying is compatible with ours. Now, we've been able to do that because we have a close relationship with the RIBA, and they've got a long-established CPD scheme and model. And it may well be in future years we'll be able to extend that out to other organisations, or indeed to employers' own CPD schemes themselves. But that's something for future work. At the moment, the only other one we'll accept as being compatible in these kind of initial years is that of the RIBA.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Matthew. He's asked, it's around specialization. So if an architect specializes in one field or type of architecture, can the CPD they carry out reflect this? Rosie, can I come to you on this one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we want you to be doing, identifying your individual needs and going for CPD that helps you meet your individual needs. So yes, specialism, go for it. That's what we were looking for. Super,
thank you. We've got a good question here from Jonathan. So he said the Reba CPD dashboard says we don't ask for, expect to see, or oblige you to acquire any CPD certificates. The ARB dashboard says if you record your CPD on Reba's platform, please upload your CPD records here. So he's asked which is it and why. Rosie, can you just clarify again, what do we actually need to see from Reba members?
Yeah, it's understanding the difference between a certificate and a CPD record. So when we're saying CPD record, we're talking about your activity log and your learning reflection. So that's what you record on Reba, and that's what you record on our portal. The CPD certificates are what you get from attending the activity. So it's like a certificate of attendance or certificate of completion. We don't need that either. It's not important. What's important is that you identify what you've learned and how you've applied it to your practice. So it's understanding the difference between your record and a certificate. We don't need the certificates. We need a copy of your Reba record if you've been selected for annual review, and that's it. So when you upload to my ARB, it should only be a copy of the Reba record, your activity log, and your learning reflection.
Thank you. So I'm just looking here, we've got a question, we've got a few architects actually asking specifically about the mandatory topics. So Simon, can you clarify, do architects have to carry out a minimum number of activities or spend a minimum amount of time to cover the mandatory topics?
Well, the minimum number of activities is 1 of each. And quite clearly, this is going to be different for different architects. You know, there may be some architects, particularly with the introduction of the Building Safety Act, who would need to spend a lot of time reading up on the kind of developments in relation to building safety, and less time in other areas. But for everybody, we think a minimum of 1 is the minimum required, and no minimum time.
Thank you. We've had a good question here from Vicky as well. So Vicky has asked, who reviews and decides if the quality of CPD is taken or acceptable? Rosie, can you talk a little bit about who's actually going to be reviewing CPD records?
Yep, it's going to be architects. It's peer review. So they will all have experience of carrying out peer review, and will have practical experience, academic experience, and they will review the records. But what they're looking for is, we're not assessing that the CPD you've done is correct for you. We're reviewing and checking that there is engagement. So we're looking that activities have been completed, learning lessons have been identified from the activity. Are they logical for that activity? And have they identified how they've applied it to the practice? Is it logical that the lesson learned was applied that way? So nobody's being assessed on whether the CPT is right for them. They are being reviewed to check that they are engaging with the scheme.
We've had a good question here as well. It's from an anonymous attendee, but it's somebody I think we can presume is a Reba member. So how do we confirm to you that we are Reba members so that we don't have to fill out the forms on the ARB websites? Rosie, could you take that one maybe?
Yeah. So it happens during retention period. So when you have to renew your registration for ARB, you'll be asked, have you completed your CPD? And it'll be yes or no. And then it will be asked, where have you recorded it? So you either record it on ARB or you record it on Reba. So by saying that you've recorded it on Reba, you're notifying us that you are a Reba member and that your record's with them.
Thank you. We've had a few questions as well from architects who are already recording CPD on an in-house system within their practice. Simon, can you maybe take this one? If architects are recording their CPD through an in-house system, do they still need to do the scheme?
Yeah, they do. So again, they can use, like I touched on before, they can use that CPD, but they would still need to log it on our system or the RIBA system. We haven't got compatibility with individual employers' CPD schemes, certainly yet.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Russell, and we've had some similar ones as well from architects who are, for a variety of reasons, they've been off long term. Maybe it's like maternity leave, maybe they're sick. Rosie, can you maybe talk about that, please? What do these sorts of people need to do? Are there deferments?
Yes, so deferment is possible, is an option. So wherever possible, we do expect architects to carry out their CPD. However, it's entirely possible something like parental leave or long-term sickness prevents you from being able to attend CPD activities. In that case, so for example, you've had long-term sickness, you went off in February, you haven't been able to do anything for the rest of the year. When it comes to the retention period, you would just renew your registration, and at the point you've been asked, have you done your CPD, you would say, actually, I need to defer. So you would click on defer. You would then give your reason for deferment. If approved, then you would be able to remain on the register for the next year without having to submit your CPD record. And that's it. Yeah, it's quite a simple process, really. It can only be done during the retention period to defer. And we will need a reason for the deferment, but if approved, that's what would happen.
Yeah, thank you. I might come straight back to you with a sort of like good follow-up question to that. So we've had a number of questions from architects who are semi-retired or are non-practicing. So do these types of architects who might be retired, do they need to comply with the scheme? And if an architect is planning to retire at the end of this year, do they need to do CPD?
Absolutely. Sorry.
No, go on, Rosie. You started.
So there's two types there. You got semi-retired and those who have retired. So if you're semi-retired and still doing some work, then you need to be competent to do the work you do. But as we said, the CPD that you do needs to be relevant to you as an individual. So if you're not doing multiple projects, you may not need to do as much CPD as someone who's in the middle of their career. So you need to maintain your competency, you need to maintain your being up to date. So it could be reflecting on the building regulations counts as your CPD. But yes, if you are semi-retired and still working, you need to do CPD. If you are retired and not doing anything, so not even providing advice, then it's maybe worth considering whether you need to be on the register or not. We have some very useful guidance on our website, and I would recommend that you go have a look at our website and see whether you need to stay on the register or not if you are retired.
Thank you. Again, this is maybe just another one that we need to clarify. We've got a question here from Nicolia. So Reba members, I suspect same rules apply to RIAS members. Can we just clarify other membership organisations? How are we treating their schemes?
Yeah, so the RIAS hasn't got a logging scheme in the same way that the RIBA has. So RIAS members will have to use ours unless they're dual members with the RIBA.
Thank you. So again, lots of questions coming in live. We've got a lot of questions from architects who are registered with ARB but are living and working abroad. So for some of these architects who are located abroad, local requirements mean they're already participating in CPD. So if architects are living and working abroad and they're doing CPD in that country, can they use that CPD for our scheme? Simon, do you mind if I come to you on this one?
Yeah, no, of course. And the answer is the same. You can still use the same CPD that you carry out in whichever jurisdiction you're practicing, of whichever organisation you're under, but that would still have to be logged on the ARB portal or the RIBA portal if you're RIB member and want to use them. And again, almost in the same way that you'd reflect on somebody who's entirely retired. If you're overseas and you don't want to comply with the ARB requirements of registration, then that's a matter for you to decide whether you want to continue to be registered. But ultimately, every architect we anticipate must comply with this scheme.
What about if an architect is living and working abroad and they're not already doing CPD? Again, just to clarify, do they need to do the scheme?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the requirement to do CPD itself is not new. It's already covered under the Architect's Code of Conduct that all architects will carry out CPD. What's new is the logging of it and the requirement to certify that as a requirement of registration. So there's nothing new about the idea of CPD. And yeah, we understand from consultations and engagement that most architects are doing far more CPD than they would sail through the scheme that we're asking them to do. What we're asking them to do is to confirm it and make sure that everybody on the register, and there's a level playing field, that everybody's doing it.
Thank you. We've got a really good question here from John that I haven't seen anything similar coming in on the questions that were already submitted. So John has asked, out of interest, how is it weighed if you attend a formal CPD seminar but consider you didn't really learn anything from it? Say it was just a marketing exercise by the provider. Rosie, what would someone like John do in that situation?
Okay. Unfortunately, it wouldn't count as CPD. If you haven't learned from it and can't apply what you've learned to your practice, you shouldn't be considering it CPD. That's why we're happy to take informal activities as well as formal, because sometimes a formal course isn't actually meeting your needs. So if you feel that you haven't learned anything, it shouldn't be logged on our scheme.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just going through the questions that are coming in. We've got one from Gaetano. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is there any list of CPD on the ARB website? Rosie, what resources do we have on the website for people?
So we are building the resources as we go along, so it's always worth checking in every few months. But we have a list for those providers that meet the can offer courses for our fire and life safety topic, courses that will meet the environmental sustainability topic. And I think we also have a general page, or we are going to soon have a general page of providers that will offer a wide variety of CPD resources.
Thank you. We have a question here as well asking how often, it's from an anonymous attendee. So will the mandatory topics change each year? How often are we going to be reviewing those topics? Simon, would you like to take this one, please?
Yeah, so if they said, we don't anticipate that they're going to change every year. There has to be some consistency and allow people to be able to tackle them. So for example, something like sustainability or building safety isn't something that you just simply develop a competence in, or develop your competence in, enhance competence in a year and then can forget about it. But that said, the whole point of this is we must retain the kind of regulatory lever to be able to direct the profession in one particular place to say, actually, we need some more competence in relation to this. And I saw in the chat, somebody was talking about things in relation to inclusivity and EDI, and that may be one for the future. I think one thing it has to be is something that is applicable, that can be applicable to everybody's practice. It can't be niche. So at the moment, we're not anticipating there are going to be any new ones imminently, but that's not to say that in the future there won't be a need for them.
Thank you. Again, I'm just looking through the questions that are coming in. I'm trying to see, is there any... There's a lot, I think, that we've covered already. So I'm just trying to see which ones. We do have a question here from Kate. What percentage of our registered architects will be audited, and how will this be selected?
Can you just read that one again, Finn? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What percentage of our registered architects will be audited, and how will they be selected? Do we have an answer on this one yet?
We do have an answer. I'm not going to tell you. So it's to a certain degree, it has to be a closely guarded secret about how many we will, what percentage we will audit. There has to be it has to be proportionate. Ultimately, this scheme is paid for by the profession, so we don't intend to, audit 100% of the profession, because that would be disproportionately expensive. On the other hand, there has to be a fair risk of somebody's record being called in for audit, so a balance in between there. So we are carrying out some fairly complex statistical analysis before deciding on what percentage, and whether that's going to be risk-based or just a plain percentage.
So we've got a good question here as well, again from an anonymous attendee. So how can you convey in your CPD record skills, knowledge and experience acquired already in your career over many years and used day in, day out? Is that something we would accept as CPD, or does it have to be more linked to an activity? Rosie, could you take this one maybe?
Absolutely. So if you're reviewing your skills or consolidating your knowledge or understanding, the process to do that could be considered a CPD activity if you are confirming, refreshing or consolidating what your understanding is, and then can apply it to work that year. That's a tricky one. So, for example, if you had done a course 2 years ago and read through the notes and refreshed your memory and go, oh, I had forgotten about that method, let's try it on this project, that could be considered CPD. But just listing your previous experience or previous CPD activities wouldn't count as a CPD activity.
I think I can also add to that. I think it's tempting for those of us who are a little longer in the tooth to assume that we know everything and our competences can't be improved, and that's simply not the case. There is always, you can teach an old dog new tricks. There are always new things coming up, particularly in something like architecture. And you know what? If you're a really senior member of the profession and you don't think you've got anything else to learn, well then do your CPD as an example to those more junior to you, to show some leadership. But this absolutely applies to everybody. There's nobody that can't develop further competence in relation to what they're doing, and most of the time people are doing it because it's interesting.
Thank you. So we've got some polls that we want to put to the audience. I think we're going to launch those now, Amalia, if you have those ready. So those should be coming up on people's screens shortly. But while we're waiting for that to launch, let's move on with questions. So we've got one here from Victor. So when an activity is logged, say, for example, a meeting with a safe and security expert, how do we know if that particular activity has been accepted as valid CPD? So Rosie, when will we actually communicate to people whether their CPD record has been accepted or not?
Okay. So we're not going to review everybody's record every year. We'll only review a selection, and they will be notified after the review whether they have met requirements, need action, or doesn't meet requirements. So if they meet action, they'll be given some feedback, but basically they've done what is needed to do to meet the scheme requirements. If it's needs action, they haven't conveyed enough information. So maybe they haven't identified the lessons learned or how they've applied it to the practice. Again, they'll be given some guidance and asked to do X, Y, and Z just to help develop their CPD record, and given a time frame to review their record and resubmit it. If it doesn't meet requirements, and that's we're looking at, they've said they've done CPD and they just haven't, then that would be a different matter. But ultimately, whether CPD is CPD or not is the individual architect. If you have learned from it, you should record it. If you haven't learned from it, you shouldn't record from it. So it's you who validates whether it is CPD or not.
Thank you. We've got one here from an anonymous attendee, and again, I think this one should be clear by now, but what happens if one fails to register or log their CPD? Simon, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, it's a requirement of registration. So unless you can confirm that you've done it at point, then you won't be allowed to renew your registration. And if you say you've done it and you haven't met requirements, as in you haven't really engaged at all with it, then we'll go through a process of removing you from the register. Because, I mean, as I said, we talked about a level playing field, but we also talked about public expectations of competence, and the public have got the right to have assurance that everyone on the register has engaged with the CPD.
Thank you. And again, this is just another one from Conrad. So can you upload a PDF document of the CPD activity onto the ARB system? Rosie, can you take this one, please?
If you're not a Reba member, no, you should be inputting it. If you're a Reba member, you can upload a copy, but we'd rather your Excel sheet copy and not the PDF copy. The Excel sheet is the one that has all the details and relevant information. The PDF copies do not have the relevant information that we need to be able to review your record.
Thank you. Again, I'm just looking through, we've got a lot of questions here, so I'm just trying to pick out the ones that I feel haven't been covered already.
I saw one that I thought was quite interesting. Do you mind if I take that one?
By all means.
Sure. So they were asking about if the scheme means that they're only restricted to doing CPD that's relevant to their current role and their current practice. The answer is no. The whole point is about professional development. So if you're looking to go into a specialism and you need that practical experience, or you need to build up your skills to become that specialist, then it's okay to do the CPD relevant to that alongside what's relevant for your current role. So again, it's about the individual person's needs. So if you want to develop into a specialism, then absolutely, please do CPD that will help you to progress your career that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Just looking through, we've got some new ones coming in. So we've got a few people asking, It's an anonymous attendee. So what Excel copy is this? Can you just clarify again, Rosie? What do people submitting on Reba, what do they actually need to produce?
So we ran a pilot last year to see how it would work with Reba records. And they had three documents. When they downloaded their Reba record, and there is a button somewhere on the Reba system that enables you to download a copy of your record, it came in 3 formats. One was an Excel spreadsheet and 2 were PDFs. One PDF was just a brief summary of the topics, I think it was, and the other one was similar to the Excel sheet, but didn't include the learning reflection. So it's simply how the Reba system works, and I believe you get the option of what type of document you want to download, but you want to download the Excel spreadsheet version.
Thank you. We've got a good question here from an anonymous attendee. How would you treat an ongoing course like a master's in building conservation? So if something is sort of like drawn out over an extended period of time, how do they treat that sort of activity? Simon, do you maybe want to take this one?
Yeah, I imagine someone engaged with formal learning in that way would sail through any CPD requirements we have of them, so they could. I mean, it's arguable, in fact, that they could have that as one CPD activity, and this is a perfect example of why we don't want to put minimum numbers on, because somebody saying I'm engaged in a master's in, I can't remember what you said, was it construction law or whatever it was, could put that down as an activity and then summarize the learning, and that's one, and that, of course, that would be way above what we would require. So, good question.
Yeah, we've got a good one again here from an anonymous attendee. So they've said the majority of the quality CPDs where you can learn something are paid. The free ones are more about the marketing of certain products or books / paid seminars. What if you can't afford to pay for them and your employer refuses to help you in that regard? Rosie, do you maybe have something to say on that one?
Yeah, so this is where the informal activities come in. You could do self-directed learning, such as reading. So look at the journals, any online material, go to library, take out some architecture books. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to pay to get CPD. So it could be on the job experience. If you apply something new, a new method, and this is the first time you've doing it, you can apply that as CPD and assess how successful it was, what if it wasn't, what went wrong. Discussion with a peer. But there are plenty, if you go online and look at different, look for different topics, you will find other ways of other activities that you can access for free. There is quite a way out there. And talk to your colleagues, talk to your peers, see what they've done and see what they can offer as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just conscious of the time here, so I think we've probably got time for one more question. We've got a really good one here from Rebecca that I think is a nice one to finish on. So Rebecca's asked, as academics, do you have advice on how we can prepare students with good CPD habits which they can carry on through their professional lives? Simon, Rosie, I'm going to ask you both if you have anything you'd like to say on this one.
I think that's a really good question, Rebecca. I think it would be to instill a love of learning. And as I say, I'd stress it again, the architects we've spoken to and when we've surveyed and when we've consulted, architects actually enjoy doing CPD. It's interesting. They do far more than they realise. What architects don't like doing is recording it. So I think it would be an instill of that love of learning and how important it is to continue and to stress the point of being registered as an architect, completing your parts 1, 2, and 3 does not represent the end of your learning journey at all, in the same way that, you know, some people might think that you only learn to drive a car once you've passed your test. All architects, I'm sure, on the call will realise actually you learn much more once you're out there in practice. So it's just a stress that it's a continuation of that learning throughout your career.
Rosie, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just simply that to recognise what CPD is. It doesn't have to be a formal course where you're sitting in a classroom or sitting online with other people with a tutor at the front giving you the information. CPD activity could be anything. So if they learn to recognise when they have learned something from an event, that would be a useful skill to take into the profession.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time, so I think we have to wrap things up, unfortunately. We've still got a lot of questions. We've done our best to get through as many as possible. We do have a lot of information on the website, so please go to our website. There's FAQs there, which should be helpful for some of you. This session is being recorded and we will be sending it out next week as well. So look, it just falls to me to say thank you everyone for joining. I hope you found this session useful.